Hi everyone, welcome to my next video today. I'm going to be talking about module federation and dynamic remote loading, how to write your own loader, and what are some of the use cases for that. So as always, if you like the content, please like and subscribe. I'll be making more videos around micro front ends, module federation. I do plan to cover Next.js and modern.js in future videos as well. So dynamic remotes. My previous videos, I've covered dynamic remotes a little bit. The use case for dynamic versus static, so just to recap, static is when you have a URL that's kind of embedded into your Webpack or your module federation config and it's static at build time. Dynamic remotes are basically loaded when the user requests the module. So it's a lazy loaded module and it's able to resolve that module from some URL. The resolution process could be a application configuration service you have out there, feature flags. You could do A/B testing and a number of different things by resolving it dynamically. So the one caveat with dynamic remotes is that there can be issues with the shared module scoping. I'll also kind of go over that here in the video. Let's get started. So in my previous videos, I went over using the importRemote function that comes from the official Module Federation Utilities package. This importRemote function today already accepts a URL in the form of a string or an asynchronous function that returns a string. Now, again, this code is kind of just hard-coded here, but what you could do is make a fetch, go out to a configuration service. You could pass it some of these parameters such as scope or any other, additional details, maybe a user JOT token, use the claims on there, make some determination about what version or what to serve, how to serve your module. However, it's kind of limited in the fact that what if I wanted to run special code around the life cycle of the remote, right? So there's a number of things that happen when you run a remote here. So let's go ahead and I'll just launch my project that I've been using. So in my previous videos, I covered this in a little bit more detail, but basically the way that this works is you'll have a remote. The remote will have a remote, let me actually show you here. The default name of the file is remote entry. So if I go in here and I'll try to zoom in a little bit. And let's limit this down to JavaScript. And you'll see this remote entry file here. So in this remote entry file, it's basically all of the information that you would need to actually load this remote and be able to resolve the module. So when you request a module, so let me go back to my project here. In this case, I have a scope, and the scope is really the name that's in my Webpack config under the module federation configuration. So that's your scope. The module is, of course, whatever that module is. So if I was just using a regular old import, it would basically be hero / product hero. And that's, basically the module. And the, remote entry file name is what we just went over. And then there's this property ESM true, which just is basically by default in NX, you're using the Webpack configuration to compile ESM modules versus common.js, which is the default for Webpack. So this is an optional parameter. I am using NX, so I'm going to switch over to a non-NX project since that's probably the majority of the use cases here. This importRemote, you could still use it here in, in NX. You would just set this flag to true. So the code that I'm going to write, I'll point out kind of what the subtlety is there and what that flag does. So let's talk a little bit more about the remote life cycles, right? What happens when you call importRemote? So in module federation, one of the things that will happen is you'll request the remote entry file, or sometimes referred to as a container entry. The remote entry file is responsible for returning your module map. So if I go in here and I search product hero, you'll see basically a promise all that returns all of the different modules that my remote requires to run whatever this is, right? Whatever this module is. So the remote entry file is the first step in the process, right? It's almost like a discovery step. I'm going to discover information about my remote. The second thing that happens is it actually requires, or basically in this case, it's fetching those remote modules, right? So there's, in this case, let's see, there's 1, 2, 3, 4 modules. Now, some of them are shared, so I don't actually have to request them, but it will request 2 because those are not in the shared scope, right? One's my actual component code, and the other one is another vendor module here. It looks like React Refresh that I'm just not sharing at the moment. When it resolves these files, right, it's going to do the remote entry, and then it's going to go grab the chunks, and it's going to do that automatically based on, whatever you configure here. This happens as well, even if you're not using this. This is just the standard kind of flow. So, if you're using static build time remotes, it'll do the same thing. If you're using import remote, it'll do the same thing as well. So it's just how things work. Now, what if you wanted to have telemetry around the portions of it, right? So you want to know very specifically without having to maybe dig through a bunch of telemetry. You have maybe an app performance monitor and you're using, App Insights, New Relic, or whichever it is. And you want to go ahead and see, okay, for this scope, it took X amount of time to retrieve the remote entry file. And for this scope and module, it took, X amount of time, or which one did it resolve? Maybe you're just trying to get metrics. If you are varying the versions based on some type of criteria, you can hook into that process. So that's what we're going to do. So we're going to switch over to our npm workspace here. And basically, the main reason why I'm switching over is because the npm workspace isn't actually using ESM modules in like NX has. So again, if you're using NX, you could use importRemote, or you could use the same code, and I'll point out the subtlety there. So we're back to this host and app2 configuration. And if I run npm start, everything should work. Let's go ahead and just launch the host here. All right, so it is done. And again, just to kind of show you, same thing, right? So we've got our remote entry file. It's coming from 3001, which is our other application. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're just going to go into the application here, and you could write this as a hook, or you could write it as something that runs as like an import statement in like React Lazy, because React Lazy is just resolving a promise. So you could put any promise-based function inside React Lazy and it'll work just fine. So I'm just going to create a utils folder just to kind of separate it, and I'm going to call, say, import dynamic remote. We'll make it a TSX file here because we're going to also embed an error boundary within this. So instead of having the boilerplate of standing up your error boundary for every single case where you use this, we can embed it in here and just write that code. So now at this point, what we're going to do is just basically declare the function here. Okay, so now that we have this, what I'm going to use as a reference is in the module federation repo, in the universe repo. You can go into packages, utilities, source, utilities, or utils, import remote. Now, this is kind of what I'm going to use as my starting function, so I don't have to go write all of this code, right? There's key parts in here, and I'll point them out. So the first thing that I really need to do is accept in a, now, again, you could make this an asynchronous function. It's really kind of up to you, but we could call it, get URL, and let's just define some types for this here. So we'll use we'll just use a type for it and call it dynamic remote options, get URL. So this could be basically there's going to be a function, and it's just going to return a promise of string. And we'll put the scope in here as a string. We'll put the module in here as a string. And we'll just pretend that this returns the full URL. So a little different from how import remote works. So basically, we're going to use our type here. Now, the main thing to consider is we need, again, I'm going to use React error boundary here. So my dev dependencies, I'm just going to add it here at the bottom. And let's see, it picks up the latest version. We'll install it real quick. Okay, so it's added. So now what we got to do is we have to, let's declare a component here, and we're going to say lazy, and we're going to just import this real quick from React. And we're going to return a function that takes props. We're just going to put any for right now. And it's going to return an error boundary. And in here, we're going to have a suspense. And then in here, we're going to have our component, and we're going to pass props to it. Just for now, let's make it a div and say, you know, some error occurred. I think you have to make this a function. So we'll make this just kind of simple for now. Inside of here, though, what we have to do is we've got to we got to load the actual code, right? So we've got kind of the boilerplate for our component here. And I'm going to go back and I'm going to steal this, or borrow this load remote function. So I don't need the docs for it. Okay, so I pasted in here. I know my URL is going to be a string. My scope is also going to be a string, and I'll just ignore this property here. I'll remove this. Now, there's this magic kind of Webpack require object here. You know, what is it? How does it work? And Webpack require is part of the Webpack runtime. So this is embedded inside of the bundle. And this is a lot of what powers module federation, or kind of hooks into this Webpack require function along with Webpack itself. And Webpack require, we could just kind of create our own types for this. So we're going to just declare global here, and we'll say, you know, Webpack require. And we really want this to be an object, and it's Webpack require L that we're using. So I'm going to just kind of adjust the types here. And we're basically taking in a URL. So I'm going to new up a URL here just to catch anything and do some formatting. And it's going to be a function that takes in a string, and we'll just say URL is a string, and yeah, it should be a callback, and it should return void. Yep, that looks good. And then this is going to say that it can't convert, so I'm going to just change the type here. So right now, this is the correct typing for Webpack require. Basically, what this is going to do is it's going to return a promise while it waits for the callback here to fire. And then once it receives this callback of type load, it's going to resolve the promise. And if you're not using ESM modules, it's going to put an object on the window object, or a key on the window object, pointing to this remote container, right? So at this point here, we've got this code. We know we can load remote, so we're going to say load remote. We're going to call, well, here, let's do this here. So this is a promise. We're going to say remote URL equals get URL here. We'll await it. And we just have to return a component. That's all that it's mentioning out of here. We'll pass in scope. We don't need module yet because it's just loading the remote entry file. So literally, this has to be the fully qualified URL all the way to the remote entry file. But once you have it, then we can start loading the module. So at this point, the remote's loaded, so we can check and we can say, let's do this. Instead of kind of polluting the window object, let's just define a custom window. And we're going to create a key of string that points to, let's make an actual type here. We'll call it remote container. And let's go back into this repo here. We're going to just kind of grab their types. Don't think it's there. So a lot of these are also here as well. And we are going to grab this one here. So this Webpack remote container, that's what we're going to resolve out of here. module path is just going to be a string. So I'll fix that. And then it needs to know about this Webpack share scopes. So in this file as well, they'll have this Webpack share scope. So I'm going to pull that over as well. Now, basically, I just need to go in and define Webpack share scopes. And I just need to point it to this. So now this will work, and I can actually just replace the type of here. And that's done. And then let's see here. So we've got initialized. Yep, that makes sense. So, okay, at this point here, we've kind of got our basic type set up, and we need to make sure that this loaded. So when load remote resolves, because it's a promise, we're going to check the window object. So actually up here, what I'm going to do is say just custom window, and we have to cast this to unknown first. And there we go. So we're going to say custom window. Now we can say, oh, scope. We don't need to check if it's initialized. We don't care. We just need to know if it's there or not. And if it's not there, we're going to just say, let's see here, remote with scope not found. That's good. Now we know that it's kind of loaded here. So we're going to go back to here, and we're just going to kind of reference what goes on in import remote, right? So basically the ESM flag, if it is set, it'll just do a different type of import. This is just a simple import statement, actually. And then it's basically doing this promise all when it gets one of these promises back. So with promise all, the init sharing function, so we know that the other promise is this, promise that's coming back from load remote or the other one. And this is just the init sharing one. So this one here, we're going to go ahead and just copy over. So init sharing is here, and you can see it's got another Webpack function. We're going to go declare types for that as well. And basically what this is going to take in is this. We can actually just remove these types, and this should work. So we've got this here. So now we can kind of replicate that code as well. We can say, promise all, and we can pass it load remote here. There we go. Init sharing. Perfect. So let's just kind of collapse some of this. So right now it's just going to do a promise all, and it's going to resolve load remote and initialize sharing. Just the same code that's in here. It's doing the same check. And then this is basically what resolves the modules, right? So I'm going to just copy this code out. We could paste this code in. It's got this call to init container or init container, and then we're going to go grab this. So just do kind of the same thing here. We'll pull it over. You'll see shared scope. So we actually already have the type for shared scopes. So we can actually come in here and just use it. You'll see it basically let me fix this real quick. It references this initializing, which actually isn't on here. So we will fix that real quick. Now we have the right type, and you'll see it'll talk about default here, and it needs to point to some type of object. So if we come in here, we'll see this this piece here, and it's pointing to a string. So default on shared scopes, right, which is what it's complaining about, it basically says it needs to be the value of it's a string, and that's not really true. So we're gonna say share scope, and we will just paste this type in here. We'll put this here, and we'll put this here. So now we're saying that, it's basically an object where the string key points to another object where it has a string key and its value is share scope. And then that should resolve the error here. Let's see what it says. Is undefined Webpack share scopes. Did I put the wrong one in there? I did. Okay, so I'm going to replace my window object. So I'm just going to say remote scope, custom window, and we'll put in the scope here. Now, basically, we don't have to have the any's here. This should just work because we fixed our types, and I think we can get rid of this. And this is just kind of normalizing the module path, right? So this is just, again, copying the existing code, and then it returns this module factory out. And you can see that all the errors are resolved here. So if I went into my home component, and you can see right now we're just doing a normal import, and this is just defined. If I went into our webpack config, it's just pointing here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove my build time remote. I'm going to go back to my home component, and I'm going to import this. So I'm going to import dynamic remote. Now I can come in here and I'll just do this for a quick second. And this is going to be basically a promise resolve. I don't know what that was. And it's going to point to my other locally running project here for now. And for scope, it's going to be products. And for module, it's going to be product hero. And we'll remove the old code. And let's see here. So this is void because we have to return this. Obviously, I could write the syntax a little different here. You'll also notice too that I don't actually check if the remote's already loaded. So one of the things that you want to do is you want to come in here and basically do a quick check and just make sure that this isn't loaded, before you actually call this code. And if it's not loaded, then go ahead and load it and then, check it and reference it. Okay, so at this point right now, we're trying to return this function out. And if you wanted to use something like a hook to load this component, you might need some maybe additional state or cache in here for things to handle things like re-renders. Okay, so since we're not using a React hook here, now this would be similar code to kind of what you would use in a hook, right? You'd be able to have props, pass props down. We're going to go ahead and just kind of refactor this and make it super simple, and just kind of get rid of any of the complexity here. So again, if you wanted to use a hook, there's an example out there called the Advanced API. You could reference that too, and this is kind of just a little refactor of it, a simplification, removing kind of all the references for use state and things that are in that hook. So let's just make kind of a very simple, regular copy of import remote. So we can actually remove just a lot of this code here. And we just want to make this function async. So we'll make it async, and then essentially this is used almost identically. So if I come over here and I refresh, you'll see my remote loads, and we'll see here that everything works exactly the way that it did before. So when we go back into our hook here, this is a pretty close example of what's in import remote, right? It's basically the same code. Now, what if we wanted to, go back and we talked about at the beginning, well, we want to put something like an error boundary around this, and we don't want to put it on every single, consumer component, right? We want to, or maybe even wrap functionality here to do something, right? Well, let's kind of break this down. So one, you could pass a callback here, right? And you could have a, entry loaded callback, and you could essentially call that right here. So you could say, okay, this is pre-entry load, and then this is entry loaded. So you could pass your own callbacks in here. You could do logging. You can see the time it takes. Use what is it? The window performance now. You could do different things in here, and you could get that delta to figure out like how slow is it to load, something like this. So this is before load, this is after load here, after this promise resolves. And when this get function runs here, this is when all of those modules are coming over the network, right? So I could say like before load equals now. And then I could say, console log. what we'll do is we'll just kind of just as an example, right? Log, window performance now minus before load, right? So, if I went in here and I ran this code, you could see, roughly, how many milliseconds passed for that to load. If I go to the network, it's not always going to be, perfectly kind of lined up. So it says 11 there. And there's, a little extra overhead, right? So it's not perfect, right? But this is the kind of thing you could do. And you could now, make your own hooks into this. And again, in the get call here, that's when all of those network requests are going to fire off to resolve those other modules that we saw here, right? So we could add hooks into there, but again, let's think about trying to wrap this and put like an error boundary before this module factory is returned. So just as an example, so what module factory is it's basically returning an object that looks like this, and then you've got whatever component is in here. That's basically what it's returning. And if you look at React Lazy, that's exactly what it's expecting. So you can see on the promise here, default of a component, right? A component's just a function that returns JSX, right? So what I could do is I could come in here and say, this is my remote component. And we still want to capture the output, but what we're going to do is we're going to return an object of default that's a function, because this is like a component, right? We're going to have the fallback here. We'll just make something simple. And you actually don't need the suspense technically, because you're already kind of here. And if I save this will return basically a component to React here. So let's see what it says. Expected a string, but it got a class or a function. So what we want to do here is we want to capture default, because again, when you're referencing this JSX element, you're actually referencing the default of whatever that module is. So we know in this case, we're not using a named export, it's a default export in our remote module. So just be careful about that. But this resolves to basically a function that returns JSX. So if we go back and we change it, it loads. So now you've got this error boundary here, and you could replace it. You could say like, bad component, just to kind of give you an idea here. And we could just, throw, and we'll return like a, fragment or something like that. Although I don't know that you need to do this. Let's see here, bad component, and we'll just substitute it. And if we reload, we should hit the error boundary, bad component. And you'll see something, I changed the theme there, something went wrong. So, we're hitting that error boundary here in our component. So this is just, an example of, how you can write your own, and then just kind of distinguishing the fact that like, okay, this is my remote entry up here, right? So when it calls the Webpack script loader, its Webpack's going to manage this for you like it does with all of its other scripts. You don't have to write custom script loading code. But what it's going to do is it's basically going to load the remote entry, which is going to make these other things available to you on that window object, right? So again, if you look at our types, this is basically what that window object resolves to. And this is really, the get here is really, again, something like, component type any, it's something like this, right? This is kind of what that type is. But I'll just leave this here. Again, this was just kind of copying things over. But this is an example of how to write your own loader, right? Just kind of leveraging some of the code that is there. You can put in those events in there. You can, do logging, whatever you want to do. It's up to you. Now, one really cool thing, and I'll just kind of mention this real quick, is if you remember, we use this require object a lot, and I'm going to just TS ignore this real fast. But on Webpack require, there's this S. So I'm going to just log it out as an example. Let's refresh here. And you'll see that on this object is our share scope. So Now, the shared scope here is going to be anything that you're sharing in your module federation config. I'm not sharing currently, but if I went in here and I said shared, and I basically said React, and I basically want to say, okay, it's going to be a singleton. This is in my remote. I don't really want a required version, but I'm going to just put this in there just to be quick. And it should share React. And if I go into my host component, I'm going to also share this as well. So I have React shared on both of them, and I'm going to go ahead and just rerun it real fast. And the idea here is that when I rerun it and I check my share scope that I'm logging out there, it should have React. So you'll see in the default scope, under React, you'll see that this is who loaded React. You could get the module and it's loaded. Now this is actually kind of interesting here, because what if you wanted to debug all of your modules and what's being shared and who's loading what and what version, and try to determine, like, is share working, is share not working? Now that you have some code in here where you can log things, you could come in here and kind of log this out and get those metrics and those details to figure out, like, okay, you know, what does my module sharing look like as I kind of continuously load remotes, right? So this is a really good way to do that. You can hook in, and again, the types are up here as well. So if we use this Webpack shared scopes, I would expect it to be the same. Let me refresh the page. Okay, so you'll see that it's the same object, right? So, you know, again, we have the types for it here too. So if you want to, you know, actually have types for it, you know, they're the same ones we used above. That pretty much wraps up the video for this. I hope you kind of enjoyed a little bit of a deeper dive into it, you know, writing your own kind of custom loader, being able to, you know, supply some type of fallback mechanism into it. And this is important, again, because you can kind of put anything into here, right? This whole thing kind of becomes lazy. So, you know, if there was an error or something in here, that could be bad. So, you know, you could, you know, put a try catch in here and, you know, default this to, you know, something else, right? You know, there's a couple of ways to kind of handle this, but if you wanted to embed things, you know, regardless of what it is, right? Error boundary is just an example. This is a way you could do that. Anyhow, I hope you enjoyed the video. Please stay tuned for more videos, and I will definitely be covering other frameworks here, and we'll be kind of looking at some of the various ways that they work and how they play with module federation. Thank you.